interesting. Not the type of question we usually get on this show, but I'll do my best. The general run-of-the-mill Christian may not even be aware of what this phrase means. It is a literary criticism in regard to source documents used in the creation of the first three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. The etymology of the word synoptic comes from the Greek, roughly meaning with or together or similar. The word is applied to the first three Gospels because they present a closely comparable approach to the life of Christ. The Gospel of John is omitted because it contains an abundant amount of distinctive content. The Synoptic Gospels record a lot of material that is common to all three of them, or is found in at least two of them. Practically the entire book of Mark, for example, can be found in the other two synoptics. The bulk of Matthew and Luke is about equally divided between agreements and exclusive content, with Luke having slightly more unique material. The great share of John's narrative is found only within his book, like 92% of it. This large volume of common material has given rise to the overtly scholastic idea of the synoptic problem and its various questions. How were these pieces of literature constructed? Did the three originate and develop independently of each other? If they did, how can scholars account for the many similarities among them? Did the writers read each other's books? Did they incorporate sections of the others into their own volumes? Did they have access to common written sources? Did they interview eyewitnesses? It should be noted that most critical work on the synoptic problem has been done from a non-religious viewpoint. The solutions offered by liberal scholarship usually reflect a humanistic, naturalistic explanation for the literary composition of the Gospels. Little stress, if any, is placed on the guiding work of the Holy Spirit in the lives of the writers. There are numerous positions and schools of thought one can take on this issue. There's the interdependence theory, there's the oral transmission of tradition theory, there's the fragment theory, there's the evangelium theory, it goes on and on and on. A very popular approach is the two-document hypothesis, which states that Matthew and Luke use two main written sources, one, the Gospel of Mark, and another document commonly known as Q by literary critics. This Q Gospel became the basis of the material common to Matthew and Luke, but not found in Mark. Of course, this document doesn't exist physically today, if it ever did at all. This leads to the four-document theory, generates out of this formula, and it suggests that there could also have been an M and an L document, which thereby contained content found only in Matthew and Luke, respectively. Now, all of this banter creates a serious timeline issue. To the liberal tradition, Mark was written in the 60s. This pushes Luke's gospel, if Mark is used as a source, into the 70s, past the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. This means Luke's companion book of Acts would have been written in the mid to late 70s. But there is good evidence that Acts was likely written around 61, when Paul was in Rome. The more conservative bend, which I agree with, places Mark in the late 40s or early 50s. This may sound early to most liberal scholars who assert that only Paul's epistles were penned that early. Do you see the kind of dilemma that we find ourselves in when too many PhDs start thinking about things? It's ridiculous. Look, when I teach a New Testament survey course, here's the line I usually give my students. The synoptic problem is only a problem if authorship is not authentic. Okay, let me say that again. It's only a problem if authorship is not authentic. If the men who tradition claims wrote these Gospels really did, then who cares about their sources? It's irrelevant. Let me explain. If Matthew really wrote Matthew, then nothing else matters. Matthew Levi, the tax collector, one of the original 12 apostles, he knew Christ personally. He saw him every day. He touched him. He lived with him. He heard him speak and teach. He viewed countless miracles and was an eyewitness to the resurrection, ascension, and Pentecost. What more do you want? Who cares how he wrote his gospel? Who cares what sources he used? He was a first-hand witness. How about Mark? If John Mark really penned the gospel bearing his name, what else matters? Mark may not have seen Jesus in the flesh, but we don't even know that for certain. Tradition puts John Mark as St. Peter's secretary in Rome, likely for a couple of years. If this is true, then he would have heard St. Peter preach countless times and had him directly as a first-hand source. St. Luke's experience is similar. A Greek physician who did not know Jesus personally, but as a traveling companion of St. Paul, he would have no doubt been exposed to a number of disciples who had known the Lord in his living years. He likely would have conversed with several of the apostles. He probably would have heard many of them preach, and perhaps even interviewed them informally. Many scholars, including myself, believe that Luke may have even had access, however briefly, to Our Lady, Mary, the mother of Jesus, perhaps in Ephesus or in Jerusalem. This could explain why his gospel provides a more detailed account of her pregnancy with the Lord and the Nativity, and a larger focus on her Magnificat and the Annunciation and Visitation and mysteries such as that. Now, Catholic tradition for 2,000 years has without doubt clearly favored authorship to these men originally ascribed to these documents. Only in the last century or two has liberal scholarship proposed other ideas. Therefore, the synoptic problem is not a problem at all. It's just fanciful debate conjured up by progressive theologians in a vain attempt to make a name for themselves in the world of academia by discrediting these ancient testimonies.